Forbidden, deleted, or simply made invisible. Imagine the endless expanses of Australia, a continent as large as the United States, with deserts that swallow secrets and coastlines stretching thousands of kilometers. But when you open Google Maps, you'll find that some places simply don't exist. Not because they're insignificant, but because someone decided you shouldn't see them. From military installations that officially don't exist, to Indigenous sacred sites veiled out of respect, from environmental catastrophes the government would rather forget, to mysterious locations where people vanished without trace. 15 places on the 5th continent that Google Maps has either pixelated, obscured, or completely deleted from digital memory. Is this censorship? Is it security? Or are there things in Australia so dangerous, so sacred, or so embarrassing that the truth must never come to light? Today we take you on a journey to the places you were never meant to find. Welcome to an inventory of Australia's hidden landscape. If you value documentaries that ask uncomfortable questions, subscribe now. A like helps us remain independent. Let's begin. The Invisible Fortress, Pine Gap, and Australia's most secret military base. To understand why certain places are pixelated on Google Maps, we need to talk about Pine Gap, officially called Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap. In reality, it's the most important intelligence base for the United States outside American soil. In the middle of Australia's Red Centre, 18 kilometres southwest of Alice Springs, lies a facility most Australians will never enter. On Google Maps, you see blurred pixels, no buildings, no roads, so just a grey spot in the desert. But satellite images from other sources show the truth. Massive white radomes that look like giant golf balls, antenna fields intercepting signals from space, and high security fences stretching for kilometres. Pine Gap opened in 1970. Officially, it serves satellite surveillance. Unofficially, it's the nerve center for drone strikes in the Middle East, for monitoring missiles in North Korea and China, and for surveillance programs that would make even the NSA envious. The Americans control the base. Australia merely provides the land. We must be honest here. Pine Gap is the reason Australia would be a priority target for potential attackers. In the event of war between the USA and China, this base would be hit with hypersonic missiles in the first minutes. Yet, the Australian government stays silent. No Prime Minister has ever publicly explained what exactly happens there. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented reality. But Pine Gap isn't the only military installation Google hides. Further north, in the Timor Sea, sits the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station, an innocuous name for one of the world's most powerful radio installations. This station sends commands to submarines operating deep underwater. Extremely low frequency waves that penetrate oceans. On Google Maps, pixelated. You see only water and a few buildings, yet the antenna masts are so large they're visible from space. 13 towers, each over 300 meters high. That's taller than the Eiffel Tower. But if you try to find them on Google Earth, you hit digital emptiness. The station operates 24 hours a day, sending encrypted messages to submarines patrolling beneath the Arctic ice and through the South China Sea. Without this station, the entire US submarine fleet in the Pacific would be deaf and blind. Another reason for censorship is the Shoalwater Bay training area in Queensland. Here, Australian, American, and British forces train for amphibious assaults. It's the largest military exercise ground in the Southern Hemisphere. Thousands of soldiers simulate invasions, airstrikes, and urban combat. During Exercise Talisman Sabre, the largest military exercise in the Indo-Pacific, this area becomes a war zone. Artillery fire shakes the ground. Fighter jets scream overhead. Amphibious vehicles storm the beaches. Google shows you none of this, only green spaces and coastlines. The infrastructure, the runways, the weapons depots, invisible. Even the temporary cities of tents housing 10,000 troops disappear from the map during exercises. One must ask, if these sites are so important for national security, why does Australia allow American intelligence agencies to control them? The answer is geopolitical realism. Australia cannot afford its own satellite surveillance, so it pays with land and sovereignty. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody speaks aloud. Sacred silence. Why Indigenous sites must remain hidden forever. Not every censorship on Google Maps serves military purposes. Some places are veiled out of respect. Australia's Indigenous peoples have maintained sacred sites for tens of thousands of years that must never be photographed, filmed, or mapped. And Google has responded to requests from these communities and obscured certain areas. You might know Uluru, the famous red heart of Australia, but the secret ceremonial sites around Uluru, you don't see those. Google Maps shows you the tourist path, the parking lots, the visitor centres. But the dreaming tracks, the sacred songlines running through the landscape, remain invisible. For good reason. For the Anangu, the traditional owners of Uluru, this place isn't a photo opportunity. It's a living spiritual archive. Every cave, every rock tells a story from the Dreamtime. If these sites were visible on Google Maps, tourists would overrun them, leave graffiti, abandon trash. That's why Google agreed to pixelate these areas. But it goes further. In Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory, there are dozens of rock paintings over 40,000 years old. They show hunting scenes, creation myths, and ancestral spirits. But on Google Maps, you won't find them. The Yolngu, the traditional owners, explicitly demanded these sites remain secret, and Google obeyed. Google actually deserves praise here. In a world where everything gets shared, liked, and commercialized, it's rare for a tech giant to say no. But this respect also has a dark side. Because if Google can decide what's sacred and what isn't, who really controls the truth? Another example is the Brewarina fish traps in New South Wales, one of the oldest human-made structures in the world. Older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. Indigenous peoples built these stone labyrinths in the river to catch fish. But Google Maps shows only the river. The exact location of the traps? Pixelated. Too many vandals had already tried to steal stones as souvenirs. But what do you think? Is it right that Google decides which story gets told and which doesn't? Or should every map be complete, regardless of cultural sensitivities? This question has no easy answer. The scars of Earth. Environmental catastrophes. Australia would rather forget. When you don't have a hammer, you must bury the truth. And that's exactly what's happening with some of Australia's worst environmental disasters. Google Maps shows you the beaches, the coral reefs, the national parks. But the toxic wounds left by mining, those remain invisible. Let's start with Wittenoom in Western Australia, a ghost town that officially no longer exists. In the 1950s and 60s, Wittenoom was a thriving mining town. Thousands of people lived there, worked in the asbestos mines. But the blue asbestos they mined was the deadliest in the world. Today, Wittenoom is the only town in Australia officially deleted from all maps. On Google Maps, you see nothing. No street signs, no buildings, only red earth and warning notices. But if you search satellite images from independent sources, you find the ruins. Abandoned houses, rusted cars, and asbestos dust still hanging in the air. The Australian government closed the town, blocked the roads, and tried to delete it from collective memory. Yet people still live there, hardened hermits who refuse to leave. They know they'll die from mesothelioma, but they stay anyway. The last resident count estimated fewer than 10 people remaining, living in homes where asbestos fibres coat every surface. The government issues death notices regularly. Former mine workers dying of lung cancer decades after they left. Entire families wiped out by a mineral they once thought was a miracle material. The Compensation Fund has paid out over $2 billion to victims and their families. But no amount of money can undo the damage. Wittenoom stands as a monument to corporate greed and government negligence. Another example is the Ranger uranium mine in Kakadu National Park. Officially, one of the safest uranium mines in the world. Unofficially, it has leaked radioactive wastewater into the environment multiple times since the 1980s. In 2004, contaminated water flooded into surrounding wetlands after heavy rain. In 2013, nearly 1,000 cubic meters of radioactive slurry leaked from damaged pipes. Each time the company promised it would never happen again. Each time it did. Google Maps shows you the national park, the waterfalls, the crocodiles. But the tailings dam, the massive basin of radioactive sludge, pixelated. The Australian government claims everything is under control, but local Indigenous communities report contaminated river water, sick fish, and rising cancer rates. These reports get ignored. The mine is too profitable. So the truth remains invisible on Google Maps. But the biggest environmental sin Google hides is the Olympic Dam mine in South Australia, the largest uranium and copper mine in the Southern Hemisphere. A gigantic hole in the earth so large you can see it from space. Yet Google Maps shows only blurred pixels, no details, no infrastructure, just a grey spot. Why? Because this mine produces so much toxic wastewater, it must be stored in underground caverns. Millions of litres of radioactive liquid that will remain deadly for tens of thousands of years. Yet the Australian government allows no independent inspections, and Google helps hide the truth. But we must also criticise. While Google censors some environmental sins, it shows others without scruples. The coral bleaching at the Great Barrier Reef, fully visible. The deforestation in Queensland, clearly documented. So why this selective censorship? The answer is political pressure. The mining industry is powerful enough to force Google to look away. Secret prisons and abandoned experiments. What the government will never admit. Another reason for censorship are places so dark the government will never acknowledge them. Let's start with the Woomera Detention Centre in South Australia. Officially, a reception centre for asylum seekers. Unofficially, a place where people were held for years without trial. Google Maps shows you the access road, but the buildings? Pixelated. The fences? Invisible. Yet reports from human rights organisations describe solitary confinement, hunger strikes, and violence by guards. Children growing up behind barbed wire. Families forgotten in the desert. In 2002, riots erupted when detainees learned they might be held indefinitely. Guards fired tear gas into family compounds. Children as young as 5 inhaled the fumes. The incident made international headlines, but the Australian government refused UN inspectors access. Detainees sewed their lips shut in protest. Others swallowed razor blades. Desperation turned to madness in the scorching heat. Some detainees spent over 7 years in this facility, never charged with a crime, never given a trial date. Their only offence was arriving by boat seeking asylum. The Australian government claims Woomera is closed, but satellite images show the infrastructure still stands, ready to be used again at any time. The water towers, the administrative blocks, the exercise yards surrounded by double fencing, all maintained, all operational. This is Australia's dirty secret. Offshore detention facilities operating outside the reach of Australian law. Another dark chapter is Maralinga in South Australia. Between 1954 and 1967, Britain conducted nuclear tests here. 7 major atomic bomb explosions and hundreds of smaller tests. The Indigenous peoples living nearby weren't evacuated. Many died from radiation sickness. British scientists called them perfect test subjects for studying radiation effects on humans. That's not speculation. That's declassified documents from the British Ministry of Defence. Today, Maralinga is officially decontaminated, but Google Maps shows only red desert, no warning signs, no markers for the radioactive hotspots that still exist. Australian scientists confirmed that parts of Maralinga will remain uninhabitable for the next 24,000 years. The plutonium buried in shallow graves will outlive human civilization as we know it. But on the map, nothing. Oh, just endless red sand hiding one of the worst nuclear contamination sites outside the Soviet Union. The government pays compensation to surviving indigenous communities, but it refuses to publish the exact locations of the tests. Why? Because the truth is too embarrassing. Britain used Australia as a nuclear testing ground, and Canberra not only agreed, but actively helped cover up the human cost for decades. This is colonial violence that reverberates through generations to this day. Another site Google censors is HMAS Stirling Naval Base in Western Australia, the largest naval base in the Southern Hemisphere. Here, American nuclear submarines dock when patrolling the Indian Ocean. But on Google Maps, you see only water and a few buildings. The submarine piers? Pixelated. The weapons depots? Invisible. Why does Google hide this base? It's because it's a strategic target. In the event of war, this facility would be bombed in the first hours. Yet, the Australian government doesn't talk about it. Instead, it advertises tourism at nearby beaches. The truth is too dangerous for the public. Mysterious disappearances, places where people vanished without trace. Not every censorship can be explained by politics or security. Some places on Google Maps are pixelated because something happened there that nobody can explain. Let's start with Belanglo State Forest in New South Wales, the place where serial killer Ivan Milat murdered 7 backpackers in the 1990s. Google Maps shows you the forest, but the exact locations where bodies were found? Pixelated. The hiking trails where victims were last seen? Invisible. The Australian government claims this is done out of respect for the families, but many believe it's about protecting tourism. Nobody wants to drive to a forest known as a mass grave. But there are places even more mysterious. The Gosford Glyphs in New South Wales are a series of hieroglyphs carved into rocks. They look Egyptian, but Egyptologists claim they're forgeries from the 1970s. Others believe they prove Egyptians reached Australia 3,000 years ago. Google Maps shows the location, but no details, no markers, just a green spot in the forest. Why? Because the glyphs have become a tourist magnet for conspiracy theorists. The Australian government wants no international attention, so the place remains vague. Another mysterious site is Wolf Creek Crater in the Northern Territory. A massive meteorite crater formed 300,000 years ago. Google Maps shows the crater, but the caves around it? Pixelated. Why? Because in 1999, 2 British tourists disappeared there. Their bodies were never found. The case inspired the horror film Wolf Creek, but Australian police never closed the investigation. There are theories a serial killer operates in the area. Others believe the tourists were killed by wild dingoes. The truth? Nobody knows. Google censored the caves at police request, officially to deter more tourists, unofficially because the government won't admit there are places in Australia so remote that people can simply vanish. But it goes further. Trafina Gorge in the MacDonnell Ranges is another site where Google Maps selectively censors. A beautiful valley with red cliffs and crystal clear waterholes. Tourists love this place, but what Google doesn't show are the caves where Indigenous peoples buried their dead. For thousands of years, Trafina Gorge was a burial site. The bones of ancestors rest in rock crevices, protected from time. But when European settlers came, they plundered these graves. Skulls and artifacts were stolen and displayed in museums. Today, the government demands these sites remain secret, not out of respect, but out of shame. And then there's Coober Pedy, the opal capital of the world, a town where most people live underground to escape the scorching heat. Google Maps shows the streets, the shops, the churches, but the illegal mine shafts that have killed hundreds? Invisible. Coober Pedy is a place without rules. Anyone can dig wherever they want. But when a shaft collapses, there's no rescue, no records, no official death toll. The government estimates over 200 people have died in these mines since the 1950s. But nobody knows for sure. And Google helps preserve this darkness. The Forgotten Islands, where Australia hides its dirtiest secrets. Another reason for censorship are islands off the coast. Christmas Island is officially a nature paradise. Millions of red crabs migrate to the sea every year. But what Google Maps doesn't show is the immigration prison operated there since 2001. Thousands of asylum seekers were detained on this remote island. Far from journalists, far from human rights organizations. Reports of suicides, hunger strikes, and violence by guards were ignored for years. Google Maps shows only beaches and crabs. 1. The prison fences? Pixelated. The Australian government claims the centre is closed, but satellite images show the buildings still stand, ready to be used again at any time. This is Australia's dirty secret. Offshore detention facilities operating outside Australian law's reach. Another example is Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. Technically not on Australian soil, but paid for and controlled by Australia. Here refugees were held for years in camps the UN called torture. Google Maps shows only tropical beaches and jungle. The camps? Invisible. Why does Google hide these places? Because Australia asked. And Google agreed. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented. The Australian government officially requested Google pixelate certain facilities on Manus and Christmas Island, and Google obeyed. But the darkest island is Rottenest Island off Perth's coast. Today, a popular tourist destination known for cute quokkas. But what Google Maps doesn't show is that this island was once a prison for Indigenous men. Between 1839 and 1903, thousands of Indigenous prisoners were sent here. Many died from hunger, disease, and mistreatment. Their graves are everywhere on the island. But the Australian government has never conducted a complete excavation. Why? Because the truth is too painful. Rottenest is now a tourist attraction. Families take selfies with quokkas. Nobody talks about the mass graves beneath their feet. And Google helps bury this history. The future of censorship. What comes next? In summary, Google Maps is not a neutral map. It's a political tool. Every pixelated place tells a story. Some stories are about security, some about respect, some about shame. Australia has chosen to hide certain truths, not because they're unimportant, but because they're too dangerous, too sacred, or too embarrassing. But this censorship only works if we don't ask questions, if we don't research, if we accept Google Maps as the sole source of truth. But we shouldn't. Because behind every pixelated place lies a story that must be told. Technology is evolving. Soon, AI-driven maps will be able to censor in real time. Places will disappear and reappear depending on who views the map. Your version of Google Maps might look different from mine. This isn't a future vision. This is already happening in China, and it will come to Australia. We must decide. Do we want a world where corporations and governments control what we're allowed to see? Or do we want transparency, even when truth is uncomfortable? This question will define the next generation. But what do you think? Is Google Maps a tool of truth or censorship? Should every place be visible regardless of consequences? Or are there things better left hidden? Write your opinion in the comments. We value very thoughtful discussion in our community. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss honest documentaries. Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant.